Conquest enters the boys' universe. What does that mean for Homelander? For Butcher? For Vought? And for the one thing this entire show has never once had to question about itself? I spent weeks trying to figure out what happens to a toolkit that has taken down every monster, and what does it do to Homelander when he finally meets someone who doesn't care about him at all? And honestly, it broke my brain a little. If this is the kind of thing you think about too, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's talk about it. Conquest doesn't arrive with a plan for the boys' universe. He arrives with his own process. Find the strongest thing on the planet, decide whether it's worth the fight, go from there. Within a pretty short window, Conquest finds Homelander. Not because Vought broadcasts him, though they do. Because Homelander is the loudest concentration of power on the planet, and Conquest has spent 1,000 years developing the instinct to locate exactly that. He would find Homelander the way you find a light source in a dark room. The first interesting thing this scenario gives you, Conquest doesn't approach Homelander as a threat. He approaches him as a candidate. Is this worth the fight or isn't it? Homelander has never been evaluated before. He's been celebrated, feared, and managed, but never treated as a specimen whose worth needs to be determined by someone who genuinely doesn't care about the outcome. That distinction lands somewhere Homelander's psychology has no equipment for. Then they fight. Watch Homelander in any fight he's winning. The laser beam isn't just a weapon, it's a statement. Now put something across from him that doesn't know what a statement is for. Homelander wins by being the most powerful thing in the room and making sure everyone knows it. It works because almost every opponent he's faced has been breakable in a way he could feel. Conquest takes damage the way someone takes notes. He's cataloging it. Homelander's lasers are not new data. They're a data point being filed against 1,000 years of comparable data points. Homelander escalates, hits harder, turns up the intensity because the performance is the only tool he has when the other thing won't break and won't acknowledge the performance is meaningful. Conquest just keeps going, talking in that measured tone, breaking down what's happening and why. Here's what breaks first. Not Homelander's body, but his understanding of what he is. The unbearable thing isn't the damage, it's the information. He was never the most powerful thing in the universe. He just never encountered the gap before. Conquest isn't delivering this information to humiliate him, he's just narrating what's happening with the same tone he'd use to explain why a building's foundation won't hold. Professional. Measured. Homelander falls. Not dead necessarily, but something in him breaks that Vought doesn't have a procedure for. He stops performing mid-fight. Conquest notices, catalogs it as the conclusion of the encounter, and leaves him there. When Ashley's team finds Homelander afterward, he's silent. He doesn't rage, he just stands there. He looks at her like she's speaking a language he used to understand and doesn't anymore. The thing Homelander needed to be the apex, to have that be confirmed and impossible to dispute, just got taken. And unlike every other time he's lost something, there's no one to punish for it. Conquest didn't take it from him, he just showed him he never had it. That version of this fight is harder to write than Homelander winning. It's also more interesting by a significant distance. Everyone who has spent years learning to navigate Homelander, Butcher, Vought, Starlight turns their attention to the thing that did it. And none of it works. Butcher's model is finding the dependency, the thing the powerful person cares about enough that you can lever it against them. He found Homelanders and Soldier Boys. Every significant win the team has had traces back to identifying what the target needed and then weaponizing it. Find what they can't live without, make it conditional. Vought's model is the same. Find the appetite, a salary, a brand, relevance. It has worked on every superhuman they've ever signed because every superhuman they've ever signed wanted something from the arrangement. Here's the problem. Conquest doesn't want anything he doesn't already have. Let me be more precise. Conquest wants to fight. That want is real. He returned against orders and against tactical sense because the fight wasn't finished. But a want, old enough, stops being conditional. A need is something you suffer without. A want that's 900 years old becomes the thing itself. Conquest doesn't fight for approval or status. He fights because stopping would require unmaking himself, and the self he would have to become on the other side is not a thing he has any concept of. The want and the person are the same object now. You cannot make that conditional. You cannot offer him something better. There is nothing better, from his perspective, than the thing he is already doing. Butcher sits in a room with no thread to pull. Vought schedules a meeting that never gets a response, not a refusal, just silence, because the meeting didn't register as something requiring one. Maybe Butcher tries the play anyway. He finds Conquest and makes the offer. Information, resources, an enemy they have in common. Conquest hears him out, politely, then asks a clarifying question that makes it clear he didn't understand the offer as an offer. He understood it as Butcher explaining how Butcher's world works, which Conquest found moderately interesting in an anthropological sense, but not relevant. That failure is quiet. No public breakdown, just the creeping internal realization among everyone who has a stake in managing power that the thing their entire model is built around has an edge case nobody planned for. Management requires leverage, leverage requires want, and the thing standing downtown doesn't want anything they can give him. Here's where this gets truly uncomfortable. Conquest finishes his assessment. He has been to other planets. He has evaluated the strongest thing the world has, determined whether it meets the threshold for sustained attention, and moved accordingly. That process has a conclusion, and at some point, Conquest reaches it. Earth doesn't meet the threshold, not because it's weak. Homelander was a decent fight. The planet has operational supers and functional resistance. It goes in the file as assessed. It's just that Conquest has been doing this for 1,000 years, and in that time, he has fought things older and stranger. Earth fits cleanly into the category of planets with potential that aren't ready yet. So he leaves. No declaration, no message for the world to interpret. He just orients and goes, the same way he arrived. And the world Butcher, Vought, Homelander, Starlight is left with footage of him standing in downtown Manhattan, looking around with what might be mild curiosity, and then disappearing into the sky. Vought can't brand him. They can't make him legible as a hero or a villain because both of those categories require the subject to have wanted something from the audience. Conquest never wanted anything. He assessed them and left. Butcher is left holding a playbook that worked on everyone up to this point, sitting in a room with Huey and MM, and nobody has anything to say. Because what do you do with the information that you were assessed and dismissed? Not destroyed, not fought to the bitter end, just evaluated and found insufficient for sustained attention. That ending is worse than destruction. Destruction implies you mattered enough to destroy. Conquest leaving means Earth, Homelander, Vought, Butcher registered as a placeholder. An afternoon's work, not worth the extended effort. Homelander, specifically, is left with something he's never had to process. He lost to Soldier Boy and came back angrier. He lost to Maeve and killed her for it in his head. But Conquest didn't take anything except the idea that losing to someone means they saw you as worth destroying. Conquest saw him as worth cataloging. The encounter was data collection. Now the thing that collected the data is gone, and Homelander is still here, and he has to continue being Homelander in a world where he knows he was never the apex. There's no PR for that. There's no performance that puts it back together. The world doesn't end. It just finds out it was never the main event. The foundational assumption the boys has been running on since the first episode is that power exists within a system. Vought's system, the government system, and the show is built on a specific moral premise. Every monster has a dependency, and if you find it, the monster falls. Homelander needs love. Stormfront needs ideology. The toolkit works because the premise holds. Conquest breaks the premise. Not because he's stronger, strength is solvable, because he represents a different category of power entirely. Institutional power, but from an empire so old that it predates public accountability. Conquest through patient, repeated demonstration that resistance is a stage you pass through. The Viltrumite Empire isn't Vought. It's older and organized around completely different principles. He isn't rejecting Vought's authority. He doesn't perceive Vought's authority as a category of thing that could bind him. When Ashley schedules a meeting, he doesn't refuse it out of rebellion. He doesn't parse the meeting as an obligation. It's not defiance. It's that the framework Vought uses to generate obligations doesn't compile in his presence. The boys, this specific show has no procedure for that. Not because the show is badly made, but because it made a choice about what kind of power it would examine. The Boys is a show about corporate superhero management becoming the problem instead of the solution. It knows exactly what it's doing. But Conquest makes the boundary visible. The moment he shows up and none of it works, not Vought's brand management, not Butcher's leverage, the show would have to acknowledge something it has been successfully avoiding. Some power doesn't care about your institutions. It doesn't need to be reformed or exposed. It just continues with a patience that makes your urgency look like a recent development. The cost of that acknowledgement isn't the casualties. The cost is what the show would have to look directly at. Power that cannot be indicted because it doesn't need anything you can withhold. Power with no seam to pull at. My honest final take is that The Boys is afraid of Conquest. Not the character, the category. The show made a promise. Every monster has a dependency, and if you care enough and pay enough in blood, you can find it. That contract is why the show works. It's why Butcher stays compelling even when he's unforgivable, because the audience believes the toolkit he's building will eventually matter. Conquest is the argument that sometimes power isn't built that way. That some things were shaped by centuries of actual war on planets you've never heard of, against resistance that made them absorb damage until the damage stopped registering as damage and became just information. The want driving them is older than the institutions trying to manage them. You cannot build leverage out of that. There is no version of Conquest's want that Vought can simulate or Butcher can weaponize, because the want and the self are the same object. I think that terrifies the show. Not because it couldn't write Conquest, but because writing him honestly would mean opening a door the entire show was built to keep closed. It would mean showing an audience that has spent 4 seasons watching institutions get dismantled that some things don't care whether the institutions stand or fall. The world of The Boys assumed it would never have to reckon with that. Conquest makes the choice visible, and once it's visible, you see the shape of the door they built the whole world to avoid opening. That's the version of the story The Boys was never going to tell. If this kind of thing is your problem too, subscribe. I've been sitting with this longer than I should probably admit to anyone. See you in the next one.